Captain Marcus Sullivan stood motionless before the central view screen on Meridian Station's command deck, his weathered face illuminated by the ghostly blue glow of distant stars. Around him, the normally disciplined bridge crew moved with uncharacteristic hesitation, their voices hushed, their eyes avoiding the terrible images that had been playing on repeat for the past 3 minutes. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Patricia Wells approached, datapad clutched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Casualty reports from Haven Prime. Preliminary estimates indicate—" Her voice cracked. "Approximately 50,000 civilian casualties. The colonial capital and 3 outlying settlements have been completely destroyed." Sullivan closed his eyes briefly. Memories of his daughter's best friend, a young teacher who had moved to Haven Prime just 6 months ago, flashing unbidden across his mind. "What about the Zelkari demands?" he asked, his voice steady despite the grief threatening to overwhelm him. Wells swallowed hard. "Ambassador Cathar has issued a system-wide broadcast. The message is being transmitted on all frequencies, both military and civilian. Put it through." The view screen flickered, and the smoldering ruins of Haven Prime's colonial capital vanished, replaced by the imposing figure of Ambassador Cathar. The Zelkari diplomat's iridescent skin gleamed under harsh lighting, the ridge of cartilage framing his elongated skull pulsing with what Sullivan recognized as satisfaction. When he spoke, his voice was almost melodic, a cruel contrast to the content of his message. "People of Earth and her colonies," Cathar began, mandibles clicking beneath his translator. "For too long, humanity has expanded unchecked through our ancestral territories. For too long, your species has ignored our rightful claims to the stars you now pollute with your presence. Haven Prime was merely a demonstration, a small taste of the Zelkari Empire's resolve and technological superiority." Sullivan's hands clenched into fists as children ran screaming through burning streets on a secondary screen, their terrified faces captured by security cameras in the final moments before transmission had been cut. "You have 30 Earth days to surrender all colonial territories beyond your solar system and withdraw your military forces to the boundaries of Mars orbit. Failure to comply will result in the systematic elimination of all human settlements, beginning with your most populous colonies." The ambassador's multifaceted eyes seemed to stare directly at Sullivan. "We expect your unconditional surrender. The Zelkari Empire will not negotiate." The transmission ended, leaving only the haunting images of Haven Prime's destruction flickering across secondary monitors. "Get me Admiral Kane," Sullivan ordered, turning to Wells. "Priority Alpha, and prepare a full tactical assessment of our defensive capabilities throughout the frontier sectors." "Sir." Wells hesitated. "Communications with Naval Command have been spotty since the attack. There are reports of coordinated strikes against our communication relays in 3 separate sectors." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "Then find me a secure channel. Use the quantum entanglement communicator if you have to. I need to speak with Kane within the hour." As Wells hurried to carry out his orders, Sullivan turned back to the view screen, now displaying a tactical map of human territory. 50 colonies spread across 23 star systems, connected by a tenuous network of jump gates and supply routes, all suddenly vulnerable in a way humanity had never anticipated. The Zelkari-Human Alliance had stood for nearly 70 years. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, even joint military exercises had fostered what Earth's politicians had repeatedly characterized as an unbreakable bond between species. Yet in a single, brutal stroke, that illusion of security had been shattered along with the lives of 50,000 innocent colonists. Sullivan thought again of Eliza, his daughter's friend, who had written just last week about the beauty of Haven Prime's twin moons rising over the settlement, of the children in her classroom who had never seen Earth, but sang songs about its blue oceans and green forests. All gone now, converted from flesh and blood into casualty statistics on Wells's datapad. "Captain," a young communications officer called out, "I've established a secure connection to Naval Command. Admiral Kane is standing by." Sullivan straightened his uniform and stepped toward the communications terminal. The face that greeted him on the small screen belonged to a woman who appeared to have aged a decade in a matter of hours. Admiral Rachel Kane's silver hair was disheveled, her eyes bloodshot from what Sullivan suspected was a combination of grief and sleeplessness. "Marcus," she said, foregoing formal protocol. "Tell me you've got something I can use. Some explanation, some weakness, anything." "Nothing yet, Admiral. The attack came without warning. No unusual ship movements, no diplomatic signals. Haven Prime's defensive systems didn't even register the Zelkari vessels until moments before impact." Kane's expression darkened. "It's the same story across the board. This wasn't just an attack. Marcus, it was a betrayal at the highest level. They used our trust against us." She leaned closer to the screen, lowering her voice. "I've called an emergency meeting aboard the Constitution. Top military brass, colonial representatives, everyone with a stake in what happens next. I need you there." "The Constitution? That's 3 days transit from my position, even at maximum burn." "You'll take the Avalon. It's being prepped as we speak. It's our fastest corvette. You'll make the rendezvous in 18 hours. Kane's gaze was unyielding. "I need your first-hand account, and I need your strategic insight. You've spent more time with the Zelkari than almost anyone in the fleet." Sullivan nodded, understanding the unspoken message. His 5 years as military attaché to the Zelkari homeworld had given him insights few others possessed. "I'll be there. What's our status alert?" "Full mobilization, effective immediately. Every ship, every soldier, every defensive installation from Earth to the outer colonies. I've also ordered all civilian vessels to arm themselves under the Sky Protocol." Sullivan's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Sky Protocol had been drafted after the Centauri conflict, a theoretical last resort that authorized civilian vessels to be retrofitted with military-grade weapon systems. It had never been implemented. "We're facing extinction." "Marcus," Kane said, reading his expression. "The Zelkari didn't just attack a colony. They've declared war on our species, and I intend to respond accordingly." Her image flickered as interference disrupted the quantum signal. "Get to the Constitution. We'll discuss the rest there." Kane out. As the screen went dark, Sullivan turned to find Wells standing nearby, her face pale but resolved. "The Avalon has docked at Bay 12, she reported. "They're refueling now and should be ready for departure within the hour." Sullivan nodded. "You have command of Meridian Station until my return. Implement full wartime protocols. And Wells," he added, fixing her with an intense gaze. "Prepare evacuation procedures for all civilian personnel. If Meridian comes under attack, your priority is saving lives, not holding ground." "Understood, sir." Wells hesitated. "Captain, do you think we have a chance against the entire Zelkari Empire?" Sullivan considered the question, thinking of the children running through Haven Prime's burning streets, of Eliza's bright smile in the last photo his daughter had shared. The Zelkari believe they're dealing with a fragmented species, scattered across too many worlds to mount an effective defense. They believe Earth will grieve silently and then surrender. A cold determination settled in his chest. They're about to learn how wrong they are. 18 hours later. Sullivan stood in the conference room of the UES Constitution, Earth's flagship and the most powerful vessel in humanity's fleet. Around a circular table sat the assembled leadership of Earth's defense forces, Admiral Kane at the head, flanked by General Lucy Carter of the Colonial Marines and Commander James Peterson of Strategic Operations. To Sullivan's left sat Dr. Andrew Morrison, the civilian head of Earth's Defense Research Division, and Dr. Lisa Park, chief xenobiologist for the Human-Zelkari Cultural Exchange. The atmosphere was tense, the faces around the table grim as Admiral Kane activated a holographic display at the center of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what you're seeing is the current disposition of our forces relative to known Zelkari military installations." Red and blue markers scattered across the three-dimensional star map, the blue vastly outnumbered by the red. As you can see, we are at a significant disadvantage in terms of conventional military strength. The Zelkari fleet outnumbers ours by approximately 3-1, and their technology, particularly their shielding and weapon systems, is at least a generation ahead of our most advanced vessels. "With respect, Admiral," Commander Peterson interjected, "these projections assume the Zelkari can bring their entire fleet to bear simultaneously. If we concentrate our forces, employ hit-and-run tactics, we'd merely delay the inevitable." General Carter interrupted, her weathered face set in stone. "The Zelkari don't need their entire fleet to wipe us out. They demonstrated that at Haven Prime, one battle group, a single surprise attack, and an entire colony was reduced to ash." Peterson frowned. "I'm not suggesting we can win a conventional war, General, but we might be able to inflict enough damage to force a diplomatic solution." "Diplomacy?" Dr. Park's voice cracked with emotion. "I spent 15 years studying Zelkari culture. Commander, I advised our government that they valued honor above all else, that their alliance with humanity was unbreakable because they had given their word." Her hands trembled as she spread them on the table. "I was wrong, catastrophically wrong. They massacred civilians without warning after decades of peaceful coexistence. There will be no diplomatic solution." Admiral Kane raised a hand for silence. "Dr. Park's assessment aligns with our intelligence. The Zelkari Emperor has reportedly declared a purification campaign against all human settlements. Their religious leaders are framing this as a sacred duty to cleanse their ancestral spaces." She paused, her expression grave. "We are facing an adversary, committed to our complete extermination." Sullivan studied the holographic display, noting the scattered blue markers representing human colonies. "What about evacuation? Can we relocate civilian populations to Earth and the inner colonies?" "We've already begun," Kane replied. "But we have 50 colonies. Marcus, millions of people. Even if we commandeered every available vessel, we could only evacuate a fraction of our population before the Zelkari deadline expires." "And even if we could," General Carter added, "where would we put them? Earth is already overcrowded, and the inner colonies are struggling with resource limitations. We'd be trading one death sentence for another, just a slower one." A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft hum of the holographic projector. Sullivan could feel the weight of despair settling over the assembled leaders, the creeping acceptance of inevitable defeat. "There is another option," Dr. Morrison said quietly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. All eyes turned to the scientist, whose usual enthusiasm had been replaced by a solemn intensity. "My team has been developing technologies that were considered ethically problematic during peacetime." Admiral Kane leaned forward. "Go on, Doctor." Morrison tapped a command into his datapad, and the holographic display shifted, showing technical schematics for weapons systems Sullivan didn't recognize. "Quantum disruptors," Morrison explained, indicating the first design. "Designed to destabilize matter at the subatomic level. Effectively, they create localized tears in the fabric of space-time, limited range, but devastating against both organic and inorganic targets. He swiped to the next schematic. Kinetic penetrators, tungsten rods with smart guidance systems, deployable from orbit, no explosive payload, just pure kinetic energy, enough to devastate ground installations without the radiation concerns of nuclear weapons. Sullivan exchanged glances with Admiral Kane, seeing his own grim calculation reflected in her eyes. These weapons represented a significant escalation, technologies that had been banned under numerous interstellar treaties. And this? General Carter asked, pointing to the final schematic, a massive cylindrical device with what appeared to be a miniature star at its core. Morrison hesitated, his discomfort evident. We call it the Planet Cracker. It's essentially an artificial gravitational singularity contained within a specialized field. When deployed, it creates effects similar to a small-scale supernova. The devastation would be absolute. My God, Peterson whispered. You're talking about a weapon that could destroy entire planets. Not planets, Morrison corrected, but certainly orbiting fleets, space stations, small moons. It's a weapon of last resort. But given our current situation, Admiral Kane's expression remained unreadable. How quickly can these systems be deployed? The quantum disruptors and kinetic penetrators could be operational within days. We have prototypes ready for installation on our capital ships. The Planet Cracker would take longer, perhaps 2 weeks to prepare a functional device. Sullivan watched as Dr. Morrison explained the technical specifications, noting the scientist's internal struggle. Morrison had dedicated his life to advancing humanity's understanding of the universe, not creating tools for its destruction. Yet here he was, offering the fruits of his genius as instruments of war. Even with these weapons, Commander Peterson said, we're still outnumbered and outgunned. We need more ships, more personnel. Which brings us to the second part of our strategy, Admiral Kane said, nodding to Sullivan. Captain, please explain the Sky Protocol to those who aren't familiar. Sullivan stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The Sky Protocol was developed after the Centauri conflict as a contingency plan for existential threats to humanity. In essence, it converts our civilian infrastructure into military assets. He tapped a command, and the holographic display shifted again, showing thousands of new blue markers appearing alongside the military vessels. Merchant vessels, mining ships, even passenger liners, all equipped with weapon systems and brought under naval command structure. You want to turn civilians into soldiers? Dr. Park asked, aghast. No, Sullivan replied firmly. We want to give civilians the means to defend themselves and contribute to humanity's survival. Participation would be voluntary, but based on historical precedent during the Centauri conflict, we anticipate an overwhelming response. General Carter nodded approvingly. Miners already use low-yield explosives and cutting lasers that can be modified for combat. Transport pilots understand navigation and evasive maneuvers. Farmers on frontier worlds are often skilled marksmen. She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. The Zelkari see us as scattered and weak. They don't understand that every human colony, every settlement, every ship can become a weapon against them. The human sky, Sullivan added quietly, is about to become very crowded. Admiral Kane surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on each face before she spoke. I won't pretend this plan guarantees victory. We are facing an enemy with superior numbers and technology, an enemy that has already demonstrated its willingness to commit genocide without provocation or warning. She stood, placing her palms flat on the table. But I also know this. Throughout our history, humanity has faced extinction-level threats and survived, not because we were stronger or smarter than our adversaries, but because when pushed to the brink, We refuse to go quietly into the night. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, the first spark of hope in what had been a gathering shrouded in despair. Dr. Morrison, Kane continued, you have full authorization to deploy your weapons systems. General Carter, begin coordinating with Colonial Defense Forces. Commander Peterson, I want a comprehensive strategy for asymmetric warfare against Zelkari fleet formations. She turned to Sullivan last. Captain, you'll oversee implementation of the Sky Protocol. Find me ships. Find me volunteers. Find me anything that can fly and fight. As the meeting adjourned and the officers dispersed to their respective duties, Sullivan lingered, studying the holographic display of human territory, the scattered blue lights that represented millions of lives now hanging in the balance. It's not enough, is it? Admiral Kane asked quietly, coming to stand beside him. Sullivan didn't look away from the display. Not by conventional metrics, no. But this isn't going to be a conventional war. The Zelkari don't understand what they've done, Kane said, her voice barely above a whisper. They think they struck a crushing blow, that they demonstrated their power and our weakness. What they did, Sullivan replied, thinking again of the children running through burning streets, was awaken something they have no concept of. The Zelkari have never faced extinction. They've never had to fight with the desperation of a species on the brink. Kane nodded slowly. Implement the protocol. Marcus, turn my sky human. Over the next 2 weeks, a transformation swept through human space, unlike anything witnessed in generations. Mining vessels that had once harvested resources from asteroid belts now bristled with hastily mounted weapon systems, their hulls reinforced with makeshift armor plating. Passenger liners converted cargo bays into fighter hangars, their navigation systems recalibrated for combat maneuvers. Agricultural drones originally designed to tend crops were reprogrammed as autonomous scouts and saboteurs. Sullivan watched the process unfold from the bridge of the Constitution, now serving as the command center for what had been dubbed Operation Human Sky. Reports flooded in from across the colonies, volunteers by the millions, ships by the thousands, all rallying to humanity's defense with a fervor that transcended political boundaries and colonial rivalries. Captain, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, the mining consortium at Ceres Station has completed modifications to their deep space excavators. They're requesting deployment coordinates. Sullivan nodded, studying the tactical display where blue markers multiplied by the hour. Position them along the approach vectors to the Jupiter colonies. Their mass drivers will provide additional firepower for our defensive line. Sir, another officer called out. I'm receiving a priority transmission from Harvest Moon. Their agricultural collective has converted over 300 atmosphere processors into makeshift EMP devices. Ingenious, Sullivan murmured. Atmosphere processors used powerful electromagnetic fields to stabilize planetary atmospheres during terraforming. Reconfigured, they could potentially disrupt Zelkari shield systems. Tell them to coordinate with General Carter's forces in the outer colonies. As Sullivan issued orders, he became aware of Admiral Kane approaching, accompanied by Dr. Morrison. The scientist looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting days without proper rest. Captain, Kane greeted him. Dr. Morrison has an update on our special weapons systems. Morrison consulted his datapad, his movements precise, despite his exhaustion. The quantum disruptors have been successfully installed on all capital ships. Testing indicates 93% effectiveness against simulated Zelkari shield configurations. Kinetic penetrators are deployed on orbital platforms throughout the inner colonies, with mobile launchers positioned on fast attack vessels for rapid deployment. And the planet cracker? Sullivan asked, lowering his voice. Morrison's expression tightened. Operational. We've mounted it on the Harvest Moon, a retrofitted agricultural vessel. Its unconventional appearance should prevent the Zelkari from identifying it as a threat until it's too late. Admiral Kane nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Doctor. Your contributions may well determine the survival of our species. As Morrison departed to oversee final calibrations, Kane turned to Sullivan, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. We've received intelligence from our deep space monitoring stations. A Zelkari fleet has been detected moving toward the Arcturus system, approximately 300 vessels, mostly heavy capital ships. Sullivan frowned. Arcturus? There's nothing there but automated research outposts and a few mining operations. Exactly. They're starting with what they perceive as our weakest, most isolated settlements. Kane's eyes flashed with cold determination. They expect token resistance, perhaps a few outdated defense platforms. What they'll find is the first phase of Operation Human Sky. Our forces are still dispersed, Sullivan cautioned. We haven't completed modifications on half the civilian vessels. We won't need all of them. Kane activated a secure channel on the tactical display, revealing a star field dotted with what appeared to be debris and derelict ships drifting through the asteroid belt at the edge of the Arcturus system. For the past week, we've been positioning abandoned vessels throughout the approach vectors, mining ships, passenger liners, even waste disposal barges, all seemingly powered down, all appearing to be evacuated hulks left behind in the rush to escape Zelkari aggression. Understanding dawned on Sullivan. A trap. Kane allowed herself a grim smile. 342 vessels, crewed by volunteers and colonial marine detachments, each equipped with Dr. Morrison's quantum disruptors, plus another 100 atmospheric craft hidden on the dark side of Arcturus 4, ready for deployment. Sullivan studied the tactical display with new appreciation. What had appeared to be a scattered, disorganized retreat was in fact a carefully orchestrated ambush. The Zelkari will see the debris field as confirmation of their superiority, evidence that we fled in panic, abandoning our outposts. Pride before the fall, Kane murmured. Their sensors will be focused on the research stations, their weapons primed for ground targets. They won't be scanning derelict ships for power signatures. Not when they believe we've already run. When do they arrive? Approximately 18 hours. The Constitution will remain here to coordinate the broader defense. But I want you on the Avalon, positioned at the edge of the Arcturus system. If the ambush succeeds, you'll lead the pursuit force. If it fails... She left the sentence unfinished. Sullivan understood the unspoken implication. If the ambush failed, the Avalon would bring word of humanity's first major defeat in what would likely be a short-lived war. I'll depart immediately. What about the planet cracker? The Harvest Moon is already in position, disguised as an agricultural support vessel conducting atmospheric sampling. Dr. Morrison is aboard, making final adjustments. Kane placed a hand on Sullivan's shoulder, an unusual gesture from the normally reserved admiral. This is it. Marcus. Everything we've planned. Everything we've prepared for. The next 24 hours will determine whether humanity has a future among the stars. Sullivan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him like a physical burden. The Zelkari believe Earth will grieve silently, he said, echoing his words from 2 weeks earlier. Instead, they'll find the sky has turned human. As Sullivan departed for the Avalon, the transformation of humanity's defensive posture continued unabated. Across the colonies, civilians who had never imagined themselves as combatants prepared for war with grim determination. Farmers calibrated targeting systems on repurposed harvesting equipment. Teachers and students constructed makeshift communications jammers from educational technology. Medical personnel converted healing tools into bioweapon detectors. The human sky was no longer just a poetic concept. It had become humanity's last, best hope for survival. Aboard the Avalon, Sullivan stood on the bridge as the sleek corvette glided silently through the outer reaches of the Arcturus system. Around him, a crew of veteran naval officers worked alongside civilian volunteers, a microcosm of the broader integration taking place across human space. Approaching designated observation coordinates, "Captain," reported Lieutenant Reyes, the Avalon's navigator, "maintaining minimal power signature as ordered." "Good," Sullivan acknowledged. "Deploy passive sensor array. I want complete surveillance of the engagement zone without revealing our position." As the crew carried out his instructions, Sullivan studied the tactical display showing the Arcturus system. The trap was set. Hundreds of seemingly abandoned vessels drifting through the asteroid belt, each containing crews ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Beyond the belt, the small research outposts on Arcturus 4 continued their scientific work, ostensibly unaware of the approaching danger. In reality, housing marine strike teams and atmospheric fighters primed for launch. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "encrypted transmission from Deep Space Station Prometheus. They've confirmed visual contact with the Zelkari fleet. 312 vessels, primarily heavy cruisers and dreadnoughts. Estimated time to asteroid belt, 43 minutes. Sullivan nodded, feeling a strange calm descend over him despite the stakes. "Relay the information to all participating vessels. Activation protocols remain unchanged. No power signatures. No communications until the Zelkari fleet has fully committed to the asteroid field." As the minutes ticked by, Sullivan found his thoughts turning to Haven Prime, to the faces of children running through burning streets, to Eliza's bright smile now extinguished forever. The Zelkari had believed their demonstration would break humanity's will to fight. Instead, it had forged a unity of purpose unprecedented in human history. Zelkari fleet entering the asteroid belt now. "Sir," reported the sensor officer, "they're proceeding in standard combat formation. No indication they've detected our vessels." Sullivan watched as red markers representing Zelkari ships moved deeper into the field of blue markers representing the abandoned human vessels. Status of the Harvest Moon? In position behind Arcturus 4's largest moon, Dr. Morrison reports the planet cracker is fully operational and ready for deployment on your command. Sullivan nodded, his gaze fixed on the tactical display as the Zelkari fleet moved inexorably into the center of the human trap. Pride and arrogance had made them predictable. Believing humanity broken and fleeing, they had eschewed basic tactical precautions, maintaining tight formation to maximize their intimidation factor rather than dispersing to reduce vulnerability. "Zelkari flagship has cleared the outer marker," the sensor officer reported. 87% of their fleet is now within the engagement zone. Sullivan took a deep breath, thinking of Admiral Kane's words. The human sky. "Transmit activation code. All vessels. Commence Operation Human Sky." Across the asteroid belt, the seemingly abandoned human vessels suddenly blazed to life. Mining ships ignited thrusters, passenger liners deployed concealed weapon arrays, and agricultural vessels released swarms of combat drones. The Zelkari fleet, caught in tight formation within the confines of the asteroid belt, had precious little room to maneuver as weapons fire erupted from all directions. "Quantum disruptors showing multiple direct hits," reported the tactical officer, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Zelkari shields failing on at least 17 confirmed vessels." Sullivan watched as chaos engulfed the once orderly Zelkari formation. Caught completely by surprise, their ships collided with one another as they attempted emergency evasive maneuvers, further compounding the effectiveness of the human assault. Launch signal from Arcturus 4. The communications officer called out. Atmospheric craft are airborne, moving to engage Zelkari support vessels. On the tactical display, a new wave of blue markers emerged from the planet's surface. Hundreds of small, agile craft, originally designed for agricultural surveying and atmospheric research, now armed with missiles and energy weapons. They swarmed toward the rear of the Zelkari formation, targeting the smaller support vessels that maintained the fleet's communication and logistics infrastructure. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "the Zelkari flagship is attempting to coordinate a counterattack. They're deploying fighter squadrons." Sullivan had anticipated this. "Signal the Harvest Moon. Execute Phase 2. Across the system, the unassuming agricultural vessel known as the Harvest Moon emerged from behind Arcturus 4's moon, its engines pulsing as it accelerated toward the heart of the Zelkari fleet. To Zelkari sensors, it would appear as nothing more than another civilian vessel, perhaps attempting to escape the battle. Its true purpose remained concealed behind false transponder codes and masked power signatures. "Harvest Moon reports successful deployment of the planet cracker," the communications officer announced. "Detonation in 30 seconds. Sullivan watched as the Harvest Moon continued its approach, seemingly on a collision course with the Zelkari flagship. At the last moment, it veered away, leaving behind a small, unassuming probe that drifted toward the center of the Zelkari formation. Detonation in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There was no explosive flash, no shockwave of destruction. Instead, a pinpoint of light appeared at the probe's location, growing rapidly into what appeared to be a miniature star. Space itself seemed to bend around the artificial singularity as it exerted its gravitational pull on everything within range. Zelkari vessels closest to the phenomenon were drawn inexorably toward it, their shields flaring and failing as they crossed the event horizon of what was, in essence, a controlled black hole. Those further away struggled against the pull, their engines straining as they attempted to break free of the gravitational trap. "My God," whispered the tactical officer. "It's working. Their formation is completely broken." Sullivan watched as the disciplined Zelkari fleet dissolved into chaos. Ships collided, shields failed, and one by one, the mighty dreadnoughts of the Empire were either torn apart by the planet cracker's gravitational forces or crippled by the continued assault from the once abandoned human vessels. "Signal all vessels," Sullivan ordered. "Full attack. Target their command and communication ships first. I want their chain of command shattered." As the human forces pressed their advantage, Sullivan received a priority transmission from one of the modified passenger liners. The Celestial Dawn, its captain, a former luxury cruise pilot named Sarah Chen, appeared on screen, her civilian clothing incongruous with the military-grade weapon controls visible behind her. "Captain Sullivan," she reported, breathless with excitement. "We've disabled a Zelkari command vessel. Their systems are down, life support failing. Permission to board and capture?" Sullivan hesitated only briefly. Live Zelkari prisoners, especially high-ranking officers, could provide invaluable intelligence. "Permission granted, Captain Chen, but proceed with extreme caution. These are not beings known for their willingness to surrender." As the improvised boarding party prepared their assault, Sullivan turned his attention back to the broader battle. The planet cracker's effects were beginning to dissipate, its artificial singularity collapsing as designed to prevent permanent damage to the system. But its work was done. The once mighty Zelkari fleet lay in ruins, scattered across the asteroid belt in varying states of destruction. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving surrender signals from multiple Zelkari vessels." Sullivan straightened, surprised despite himself. The Zelkari were not known to surrender, preferring death to the dishonor of capture. Verify those signals. This could be a trap. Verification complete. Sir, 17 Zelkari vessels, including what appears to be their secondary command ship, are powering down weapons and shields. They're requesting terms. A ripple of stunned disbelief passed through the bridge crew. Sullivan himself felt a momentary disorientation, as if the universe had suddenly shifted on its axis. They had prepared for a desperate last stand, for a war of attrition that humanity might not survive. They had not prepared for victory, certainly not in the first engagement. "Captain," the sensor officer reported, breaking into Sullivan's thoughts. "The Celestial Dawn has successfully boarded the Zelkari command vessel. They report—" He paused, checking his readout. "They report the capture of Commander Vexar, tactical commander of the Zelkari fleet." Sullivan's eyebrows rose in surprise. Vexar was one of the Empire's most decorated military leaders, a veteran of countless campaigns against other species. His capture represented not just a tactical victory, but a profound psychological blow to Zelkari morale. "Sir," the communications officer added, "we're receiving transmissions from across human space. Word of the engagement is spreading. The Thornax Confederacy has withdrawn their non-aggression pact with the Zelkari. The Vegan Republic is offering military support to human colonies in their sector. The Century Assembly has declared the Zelkari actions crimes against sentience and imposed an immediate trade embargo." Sullivan absorbed this information with growing amazement. The political landscape of the galaxy was shifting before their eyes, alliances realigning in the wake of humanity's unexpected show of strength. What had begun as a desperate defense had transformed into something else entirely, a statement of humanity's resolve that echoed across the stars. "Captain Chen is requesting instructions regarding the prisoners, sir," the communications officer reminded him. Sullivan considered for a moment before responding. "Secure Commander Vexar and any other high-ranking officers aboard the Avalon. Standard protocols for prisoners of war. They are to be treated with dignity, despite the atrocities their forces committed." He paused, then added, "And inform Captain Chen that she and her crew have made history today. The first civilian vessel to capture an enemy commander in the field. As orders were relayed, and the human forces consolidated their unprecedented victory." Sullivan allowed himself a moment of reflection. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Zelkari Empire controlled vast territories, with fleets and armies that dwarfed even this substantial force. Yet something fundamental had changed, a shift in the balance of power that extended beyond mere military calculations. "Signal Admiral Kane," Sullivan instructed. "Inform her that Operation Human Sky has succeeded beyond all projections. The Zelkari fleet has been neutralized, Commander Vexar captured, and we've received 17 formal surrenders." He paused, then added words he had not expected to say. "The Human Sky has held. Admiral, and it's about to spread across the galaxy." As the Avalon broke orbit to rendezvous with the Constitution, Sullivan gazed out at the scattered remnants of the once mighty Zelkari fleet. Among the debris, human vessels moved with purpose, civilian ships alongside military, united in a common cause that transcended their differences. The Zelkari had miscalculated in the most profound way possible. They had struck at humanity's heart, believing it would shatter. Instead, they had forged it into a weapon of unprecedented power, a weapon now turned against its creators. In the days that followed, humanity's unexpected victory at Arcturus reverberated throughout the galaxy. News spread with the speed of quantum communication, carried by merchant vessels and diplomatic couriers to the farthest reaches of known space. The Zelkari Empire, long feared for its military might and technological superiority, had suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of a species they had dismissed as fragmented and weak. Aboard the Constitution, now stationed in orbit around Earth, Sullivan stood beside Admiral Kane as they prepared to interrogate their most valuable prisoner. Commander Vexar had been transferred to the flagship under heavy guard, his once resplendent armor replaced with simple prisoner's garments that did little to diminish his imposing presence. The interrogation chamber was sparse, containing only a table and chairs made of polished steel. As Vexar was led in, his multifaceted eyes swept the room with calculating intelligence, betraying no fear despite his circumstances. "Commander Vexar," Admiral Kane began, her voice level, "you have been charged with war crimes against civilian populations, specifically the unprovoked attack on Haven Prime that resulted in 50,000 civilian deaths. Do you understand these charges?" Vexar's mandibles clicked in what Sullivan recognized as amusement. When he spoke, his translator rendered his words in flawless English, though the underlying tone carried unmistakable condescension. "I understand that primitives often confuse military necessity with criminality," he replied. Haven Prime was a strategic target, established on territory rightfully belonging to the Zelkari Empire. Its destruction was regrettable, but necessary to demonstrate the consequences of human expansion into our ancestral spaces. Sullivan studied the Zelkari commander, noting the subtle shifts in his exoskeletal plates that indicated not fear, but calculation. Vexar was assessing them, searching for weaknesses even in captivity. These ancestral spaces were unoccupied for millennia before human settlement. Kane countered, "Your own historical records, shared during our decades of alliance, confirm this. Haven Prime was established with the full knowledge and approval of the Zelkari diplomatic corps." Vexar's head tilted slightly. Diplomatic accommodations were made by those who did not understand the greater imperatives of our species. The Emperor has corrected this error of judgment. Sullivan leaned forward. "And yet, your demonstration has resulted not in human submission, but in the destruction of your fleet and your own capture. An error of judgment indeed." For the first time, Vexar's composure showed signs of strain. His secondary breathing slits flared. An involuntary response that Dr. Park had once explained indicated surprise or agitation in Zelkari physiology. "A single battle means nothing," Vexar insisted. "The Empire controls 1,000 worlds. Our fleets darken the skies of 100 systems. This setback will soon be corrected with overwhelming force." Admiral Kane activated a holographic display embedded in the table. "Perhaps you should examine the current strategic situation before making such assertions." "Commander." The display showed a galaxy map marking Zelkari territory in red and human settlements in blue. But scattered throughout the red were now yellow markers, dozens of them, representing systems where Zelkari control had been challenged or overthrown in the days since the Battle of Arcturus. "The Thornax have reclaimed 3 systems you occupied during the border conflicts," Kane explained, highlighting the relevant sectors. "The Vegan Republic has moved its defense fleet to the Proxima boundary, cutting off your supply routes to the southern territories. And perhaps most significantly, the Century Assembly has declared your actions at Haven Prime an abomination against all sentient life, and revoked your access to their Jumpgate network." Vexar's eyes fixed on the display, his earlier confidence visibly eroding as he processed the information. "These developments are temporary. Lesser species often make symbolic gestures in moments of chaos. These aren't symbolic gestures, Commander," Sullivan interjected. "They're the beginning of a fundamental realignment. Your empire believed it could act with impunity, that other species would stand by out of fear or self-interest. But Haven Prime changed everything. It revealed the true nature of Zelkari ambitions, and the galaxy has taken note. Admiral Kane deactivated the display. We're not here to debate galactic politics. Commander, we're here to discuss terms. Vexar's head snapped up, mandibles clicking rapidly in what Sullivan recognized as incredulity. Terms? You speak of terms to me? The Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. The Empire, Kane replied coolly, is no longer in a position to dictate. As we speak, human forces, alongside our new allies, are liberating Zelkari-occupied worlds throughout the frontier sectors. Your supply lines are severed, your communication networks compromised, and your military leadership is in disarray. She slid a datapad across the table. These are our conditions for cessation of hostilities. They include full withdrawal from all contested territories, comprehensive reparations for Haven Prime and other affected colonies, and immediate demilitarization of your deep space fleets. Vexar didn't touch the datapad. The Emperor would rather see our homeworld reduced to ash than accept such terms. That, Sullivan said quietly, can be arranged. The Zelkari commander's eyes shifted to Sullivan, sensing the cold certainty behind his words. You would destroy an entire civilization, billions of lives, and you call us monsters for Haven Prime? The difference, Sullivan replied, is that we're giving you a choice: surrender, reparations, peace, or continuation of a war you cannot win. Haven Prime was given no such option. For several long moments, Vexar sat in silence, his alien features unreadable to anyone without Sullivan's extensive experience with Zelkari expressions. Finally, the commander reached for the datapad. I have no authority to accept these terms, he said, his voice subdued. But I will transmit them to the Imperial Council. Whether they listen, that is beyond my control. As Vexar was escorted from the interrogation chamber, Admiral Kane turned to Sullivan. Do you think they'll surrender? Sullivan considered the question, thinking of the pride and ancient traditions that defined Zelkari culture. Not immediately. Their leadership will need to save face, to frame any concessions as strategic rather than forced. But they're pragmatists beneath the rhetoric. When they realize the full extent of their isolation, they'll negotiate. Kane nodded slowly. And if they don't? Then we demonstrate that Haven Prime was not an isolated tragedy, but a preview of our resolve. The planet cracker performed beyond expectations at Arcturus. Dr. Morrison believes we could construct more within weeks. A shadow passed across Kane's features. Is that what we've become? Marcus? A species willing to inflict the same atrocities we condemned? Sullivan thought of the children running through burning streets, of Eliza's smile forever extinguished. We've become what we needed to be to survive. But what separates us from them is that we're offering another path. The choice is theirs. As they exited the interrogation chamber, a junior officer approached with a datapad. Admiral. Captain. Urgent communication from the Thornax Confederacy. Their high command is requesting a joint military operation against Zelkari forces in the Epsilon sector. Kane accepted the datapad, scanning its contents with raised eyebrows. They're offering access to their cloaking technology in exchange for our quantum disruptors. An alliance? Sullivan asked, surprised despite himself. More than that, Kane replied, handing him the datapad. They're proposing a galactic council, a formal coalition of species to prevent future aggression like Haven Prime, with humanity as a founding member. Sullivan read the proposal, a strange mixture of grief and hope rising within him. A week ago, humanity had stood alone against extinction. Now they were being courted as equals by species that had previously regarded them as upstarts in the galactic community. "It seems," he said quietly, "that the human sky is expanding." In the weeks that followed, the transformation of galactic politics continued at a pace that left even veteran diplomats struggling to adapt. The Zelkari Empire, faced with economic isolation and military encirclement, reluctantly agreed to peace negotiations. The talks, held aboard a neutral century vessel at the edge of human space, were tense and frequently acrimonious, but they progressed, a prospect that would have seemed impossible in the immediate aftermath of Haven Prime. Meanwhile, the informal alliance that had formed around humanity's resistance evolved into something more structured. Representatives from 12 species gathered on Earth's lunar colony to draft the founding charter of what would become the Galactic Council, an interspecies governance body with powers to sanction aggressive action and mediate territorial disputes. Sullivan, now serving as humanity's military representative to the Provisional Council, found himself thrust into diplomatic waters that would have been unthinkable for a career naval officer just months earlier. Yet, as he observed the proceedings from his seat in the grand chamber carved from lunar bedrock, he recognized that his perspective as a frontline commander during the brief but pivotal conflict brought value to the deliberations. "The Zelkari delegation has submitted revised reparations proposals," announced the Century Mediator. Her translucent appendages rippling in what Sullivan had learned indicated formal proclamation. "They have agreed to full withdrawal from contested territories and a 50-year demilitarization of their deep space fleet. However, they continue to resist the establishment of permanent monitoring stations within their home system." "Unacceptable," rumbled the Thornax representative, his crystalline exoskeleton glinting under the chamber's lights. "Without verification protocols, their commitments are meaningless. We all witnessed their betrayal of the human alliance. Trust must be earned through transparency." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber as representatives from a dozen species considered the implications. Sullivan noted the discomfort of the Zelkari observers positioned at the back of the hall. Once proud military officers, now reduced to silent witnesses as their empire's fate was decided by a coalition they had dismissed as inferior. "Perhaps," Sullivan suggested, rising to address the gathering, "we should consider a graduated approach to verification. The Zelkari homeworld holds profound cultural and religious significance to their species. Their resistance stems not from a desire to conceal military activities, but from the perceived desecration of sacred spaces." He activated the central holographic display, showing a map of Zelkari territory. "We could establish monitoring stations at jump points and major transit hubs, with gradually decreasing oversight as compliance is demonstrated. This preserves their cultural sovereignty while ensuring our security requirements are met." The chamber fell silent as representatives considered his proposal. Sullivan was acutely aware of the irony of his position, advocating moderation toward the very species that had slaughtered innocent civilians at Haven Prime. Yet he also understood that lasting peace required more than victory. It required wisdom. "Captain Sullivan's proposal has merit," acknowledged the vegan representative, her feathered crest rising in formal approval. "We did not form this council merely to punish the Zelkari, but to establish a framework for peaceful coexistence among all species. Respect for cultural sovereignty, even for those who have transgressed, must be a founding principle." Gradually, a consensus formed around Sullivan's compromise. The monitoring stations would be established at strategic locations, their presence gradually reduced as the Zelkari demonstrated compliance with the peace terms. It was not perfect. No diplomatic solution ever was, but it represented a balance between justice and practicality. As the session adjourned, Sullivan found himself approached by Dr. Morrison, who had been attending as a scientific advisor to the human delegation. "Remarkable," Morrison said, gesturing toward the departing representatives. "A month ago, these species barely acknowledged our existence. Now they seek our counsel on matters of galactic security." Sullivan nodded, his thoughts turning to the cost of this newfound respect. 50,000 lives at Haven Prime. Was that the price of our seat at this table? Morrison's expression sobered. "I've asked myself the same question about my weapons. The quantum disruptors. The planet cracker. I created them to preserve life. Yet they've caused destruction on a scale I struggle to comprehend." "They also prevented our extinction," Sullivan reminded him. "And now they're helping secure a peace that might last generations." As they walked through the lunar complex, Sullivan observed the integration of species that had once regarded each other with suspicion or indifference. Thornax engineers collaborated with human scientists on environmental systems. Vegan cultural attachés organized exchanges with Earth's universities. Even the Century, traditionally isolationist, had established permanent diplomatic missions on 3 human colonies. "We're establishing more than a political alliance," Morrison noted, following Sullivan's gaze. "The Galactic Academy of Sciences has already approved funding for a multi-species research initiative. The Interstellar University on Mars will welcome students from 12 worlds next semester." Sullivan smiled faintly, thinking of his daughter's messages describing her excitement about studying century literature in the upcoming term. Out of tragedy, something new is emerging, something that might justify the sacrifice. In time. Their conversation was interrupted by a priority alert on Sullivan's communication device. "Captain Sullivan, your presence is requested in Conference Room 3. Admiral Kane has arrived with the final peace treaty for review." Making his way through the bustling corridors of the lunar complex, Sullivan found Admiral Kane waiting alongside representatives from the Provisional Council's Executive Committee. The Admiral's expression was solemn but satisfied, the look of someone who had navigated treacherous waters and finally glimpsed the distant shore. "Marcus," she greeted him, gesturing to the document displayed on the conference table's surface. "It's done. The Zelkari Imperial Council has ratified the treaty by unanimous vote. The war is officially over." Sullivan studied the treaty's provisions, noting the comprehensive nature of the settlement. Beyond the military and territorial concessions, the document established frameworks for cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and even a joint memorial for the victims of Haven Prime, to be constructed on the colony's surface with contributions from all signatory species, including the Zelkari themselves. "This is more than I expected," he admitted, "especially the memorial provisions." Kane nodded. "It seems our victory affected them more profoundly than we anticipated. According to our diplomatic sources, the defeated Arcturus triggered something akin to a spiritual crisis within their society. Their religious traditions held that military supremacy was evidence of divine favor. The loss to a lesser species has forced a fundamental reevaluation." "Humility through humiliation," Sullivan murmured. "A harsh teacher. But perhaps a necessary one. For them and for us." Kane's expression turned reflective. "We came so close to extinction. Marcus, had they struck at Earth first instead of Haven Prime, had they not underestimated our resolve?" She left the thought unfinished. "But they did underestimate us," Sullivan replied. "They thought Earth would grieve silently. Instead, the sky turned human." As the final preparations for the treaty signing ceremony got underway, Sullivan found himself drawn to the observation dome atop the lunar complex. From there, Earth hung in the void like a blue jewel, its surface partly obscured by swirling cloud patterns. Somewhere on that distant sphere, his daughter was preparing for her studies, her future now secure in ways that had seemed impossible in the dark days after Haven Prime. He became aware of a presence beside him, Dr. Park, the xenobiologist whose work had once fostered understanding between humans and Zelkari. She had been notably absent from most of the treaty negotiations, her expertise tainted by the failure to predict Zelkari aggression. "I couldn't stay away from the signing," she explained, sensing his surprise. "Despite everything, I needed to see this moment, to believe that something positive could emerge from such tragedy." Sullivan nodded in understanding. "Your work wasn't wasted. Doctor, the cultural insights you provided helped us navigate the peace process. Without your research, we might have demanded terms the Zelkari could never accept, prolonging the conflict unnecessarily." Park's eyes remained fixed on the earth. 50,000 lives. I keep seeing their faces. Captain, the families I interviewed during my field research, the children in the schools I visited, all gone because I misinterpreted Zelkari intentions, because I saw what I wanted to see in their culture rather than what was actually there. "We all bear responsibility," Sullivan replied, thinking of his own role in the military alliance that had left human colonies vulnerable. "But we honor the dead by building something lasting from their sacrifice." As they stood in contemplative silence, a movement in lunar orbit caught Sullivan's attention. A formation of ships, human vessels flying alongside Thornax, vegan, and even a Century diplomatic cruiser, executed a synchronized maneuver above the complex, their running lights tracing patterns of unity against the backdrop of stars. "The first joint exercise of the Galactic Council Defense Force," Park observed. "Symbolic, but powerful." Sullivan watched as the ships completed their choreographed display, a demonstration of the new reality taking shape in the aftermath of conflict. More than symbolic, it's a declaration that what happened at Haven Prime will never happen again, not to any species. The ceremony that followed was broadcast across human space and to all member worlds of the newly formalized Galactic Council. In the Grand Chamber, representatives from 17 species, including, remarkably, a subdued Zelkari delegation, affixed their signatures or biological equivalents to the Treaty of Luna, formally ending hostilities and establishing the framework for a new interstellar order. As the primary human military representative, Sullivan was called upon to make remarks following the signing. Standing before the assembled dignitaries and the countless billions watching via quantum transmission, he found himself thinking not of grand political statements, but of the personal cost that had led to this moment. "We gather today not to celebrate victory," he began, "but to acknowledge transformation. 1 month ago, humanity stood alone against extinction. Today, we stand with new allies and even former adversaries in recognition of a simple truth. The cosmos is vast enough for all our aspirations, if we have the wisdom to pursue them in harmony rather than conflict." He paused, his gaze moving across the assembled representatives. The people of Haven Prime did not die for this treaty. Their loss was senseless, unjustifiable, a tragedy that can never be fully reconciled. But we can ensure their memory guides us toward a future where such atrocities become unthinkable, where differences are resolved through dialogue rather than destruction. As he concluded his remarks, Sullivan felt a weight lifting, not the burden of grief, which he knew would never entirely fade, but the crushing responsibility of humanity's survival that had driven him since those first terrible images from Haven Prime had appeared on Meridian Station's view screens. The war was over. The human sky had not only held, it had expanded to encompass a coalition of species united in common purpose. From the ashes of Haven Prime, a new order had risen, one in which humanity held not just a place, but a voice of influence. 5 years later, Sullivan stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, the orbital platform constructed above the rebuilding colony of Haven Prime. Below, the once devastated settlement had been transformed. New structures rose from the scorched earth, their architecture reflecting influences from a dozen different species. At the center of the main settlement stood the Memorial Garden, where representatives from all council worlds had contributed living monuments to the victims, Zelkari crystalline trees growing alongside earth oaks, Thornax mineral formations providing homes for vegan symbiotic organisms. Ambassador Sullivan, a young aide, approached, respectfully interrupting his contemplation. "The educational delegation has arrived. They're ready for your address whenever you're prepared." Sullivan nodded, straightening the formal diplomatic attire that still felt strange after years in uniform. His appointment as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council had come as a surprise, a recognition of his role in both the conflict and the peace that followed. Though he sometimes missed the clarity of military command, he had embraced the opportunity to help shape the new interstellar community. Making his way to the station's main auditorium, he found it filled with students, young representatives from 23 species participating in the first Galactic Youth Summit. Among them, he spotted his daughter, now a graduate student specializing in interspecies diplomatic protocol, deep in conversation with a young Century. As Sullivan took the podium, the diverse gathering fell silent, their attention focused on the human who had come to symbolize both warfare's devastation and diplomacy's promise. "Welcome to Haven Station," he began, looking out over the faces, human and alien alike, that represented the future they had fought to secure. 5 years ago, the ground beneath us was scorched and barren, the air filled with ash, the people gone. Today, life returns, not just human life, but a tapestry of sentience from across our shared galaxy. He gestured toward the viewports, showing the rebuilt colony below. The tragedy that occurred here could have been the beginning of a cycle of vengeance and destruction that consumed us all. Instead, through courage, cooperation, and ultimately compassion, it became the foundation for something unprecedented, a true community of worlds. As he continued his address, Sullivan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, the desperate days after Haven Prime, the unlikely victory at Arcturus, the careful construction of peace from the rubble of war. None of it had been inevitable. At each step, choices had been made, by individuals, by governments, by entire species, that had steered the outcome away from continued conflict and toward collaboration. The lesson of Haven Prime, he concluded, is not that strength prevails, though strength was necessary. It is not that technology determines destiny, though technology shaped the conflict. The lesson is simpler and more profound. When you strike at the heart of a family, an entire civilization will rise to defend it. And when that defense succeeds, the true test of greatness lies in what follows, in the choice between perpetuating cycles of violence or forging new paths of understanding. As the assembled students applauded, Sullivan caught his daughter's eye across the auditorium. Her smile, so reminiscent of Eliza's, held both pride and promise, a bridge between memory and possibility. In that moment, he felt the full circle of their journey, from the grief that had threatened to consume humanity to the unity that had ultimately saved it. The Zelkari had believed Earth would grieve silently. Instead, the sky had turned human, and in doing so, had transformed not just the balance of power, but the very nature of interstellar relations. From tragedy had emerged not just survival, but renaissance, a new age of cooperation that honored the dead, by creating something worthy of their sacrifice. As Sullivan left the podium, a young Zelkari student approached, her posture conveying the formal respect that had become characteristic of their species since the war. "Ambassador," she said, her translator rendering her clicks and whistles into melodic English. "Your words honor both the lost and the living. My elders speak of Haven Prime with great shame, but also with gratitude for the wisdom that prevented further bloodshed. I hope to continue this path of reconciliation through my studies." Sullivan regarded her with the compassion that had gradually replaced his anger over the years. "That, more than any treaty or alliance, is the true victory. That your generation sees possibilities where mine saw only threats." As the student rejoined her peers, Sullivan turned his gaze once more to the viewport, to the rebuilt colony below and the stars beyond. The human sky now extended farther than anyone could have imagined in those dark days after Haven Prime, not through conquest but through connection. Not through dominance, but through dialogue. They had transformed grief into strength, vengeance into vision, isolation into community. And in doing so, they had created a legacy that would endure long after the scars of conflict had faded from memory, a testament to the truth that even in humanity's darkest hour, the capacity for renewal remained their greatest power. The sky had turned human. And in that transformation, all who dwelled beneath it had found a new way forward among the stars.